This episode of The Candid Frame is sponsored by the Charcoal Book Club. Working with the most respected names in contemporary photography, Charcoal selects and delivers essential photo books to a worldwide community of collectors. Each month, members receive a signed first edition monograph and an exclusive print to add to their collections. Join the club by visiting charcoalbookclub.com and use the promo code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. Happy New Year and welcome back for a new season of The Candid Frame. We are both excited and honored to bring you more great conversations in our 16th year of production. And we begin 2022 with a wonderful conversation with fine art photographer Cig Harvey. She provides some wonderful insight into what it means not only to be creative, but to live life creatively. She has published several amazing photography books, and her latest is titled Blue Violet. This conversation with Cig is, I think, a great way to start a new year. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. Well, I've been a great fan of your work for a long time, and I'm really pleased to finally have a chance to sit and talk with you. And going over your work, there were so many things I was really fascinated by. But one of the things I wanted to touch on, you talk about early in your career about making the switch from taking pictures of something and then transitioning to making pictures about something. And I always have loved that statement. But I think one of the things to be able to begin to do that and do that effectively is to understand the language of photography. And by that, I don't mean just the mechanics of making the picture, but just like if you're a writer, you have to understand the English language if you're writing in English. When you're using photography, you have to understand the language of photography. And I'd love for you to sort of talk to us in terms of making that transition of making pictures of things and about things, but at the same time, coming to understand the language of photography and what tools you needed to sort of master in that respect to be effectively able to express yourself in that way in images.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I think about a lot. I mean, I had worked in a dark room as a teenager. I, ran a studio for Mark Emerson when I was in my very early 20s. I mean, I just knew that this was my medium, but it wasn't until probably my late 20s that I really sort of fully understood what you're saying. I think it was a medium that I knew I loved, and I loved being out with my camera and being a witness to the world. But it wasn't until I realized that I could truly tell stories about something. And then how was I going to do that, right? The language of photography. So, the form, I think you're talking about the formal concerns of light, of depth of field, of color, of palette, of vantage point, all of these things, which camera you use, all of these things. It's the difference between English and German, or, it's a language, right? And what we want to use the language that is most appropriate for the story we're trying to tell. So I think before, and I've never really exactly thought of it this way, but I think before I sort of fully grasped all of that and this idea of storytelling, I sort of used to go out with my camera and sort of walk around and wait for something to strike me. Whereas once I moved to Maine and really sort of came at it from a different way, where I sat in an empty room and said, well, what do I want to talk about? A camera is just an expensive pencil. Let me start there rather than going out in the world trying to sort of target practice, trying to find things. So that was the switch for me, where I really thought about, well, what do I want to say? And then how am I going to say it? So content and then form, right? The formal concerns. How is it best to tell this story?
Like one of the things that I observe when I do my workshops,
Yeah.
one of the assignments I have my students do is I purposely have them make photographs that are not in focus. They either can be just out of
Yeah.
focus or they can be blurred. And it's really interesting how much more emotionally evocative an image becomes when it's sort of nebulous in that way rather than being absolutely
Mm.
sharp and rigidly defined. And that's one of the things in terms of photograph as a language that I've always fascinated me, that the less distinct it is, that somehow it becomes more emotionally evocative. I mean, I know that you've used that sort of technique in your images. So I would love for you to sort of explore that with me in terms of why do you think that is, or how have you found that effective in your work?
I don't do exactly that same assignment, although I love it and will try it, quoting you, obviously. But this idea of, I think what you're suggesting is when you take away focus, you're taking away the subject matter. And so it becomes less a picture of a tree, a flower, a person, and it becomes more the idea of something, right? So then we're left with this not the exact representation that is clear and we think we understand it immediately and then we move on. We're left sort of grappling, well, is this a metaphor? Is this a symbol? The viewer is working harder. So I think it really comes down to that idea of photography is one of the few art forms that is really so tightly tied to its subject matter. And its veracity around the subject matter. And I think there's a certain freedom that when you let go of focus, then you're taking ownership of what you're trying to photograph, and also suggesting that it could be about that, but it's not of the subject matter. I think we get at things in very much the same way there. You could either do it through focus or you could do it through, okay, let's go out and find metaphors for what we're trying to say. And whether that's lack of focus or whether that's, using the symbolism, the language of art, what does a cardinal mean in the history of art? Or what does it mean, sort of looking at how we can use other ways to tell our stories.
It's interesting to see when I look at the breadth of your work, there are some images that seem very intentional, especially when it came to the self-portraits.
Yeah.
Right. You had a concept, you had an idea, and you sort of formulated them. And there are others that are sort of just, they seem absolutely spontaneous, and they are spontaneous. And then you also have the sort of the free writing that you frequently do in terms of being able to draw an idea. And it really fascinates me the variety of approaches that you take to tap into that part of you from which all this creativity stems from.
I think it's exactly all of that, where, I am trying to just make as many pictures as possible. Sometimes people, and I talk with my students about this all the time, sometimes our work is, if we make the project so impossible to get to every day, then we don't get there. And then it becomes this another thing that you haven't done yet today, or another thing you haven't done yet this month, even though it means so much to our lives to have these creative projects. So I say, let's make it easier on ourselves. Let's make work, subject matter that we can have access to every day. And let's try different approaches. Let's try just being out with our cameras and responding to the world and see what happens, using our cameras almost as a form of note-taking. They'll tell us where we're supposed to go. But then also, let's put the conscious mind to that and brainstorm around, why am I drawn to that person? Why do I keep going back to this river? Why are my pictures always out of focus or blurry, completely intentionally? What am I trying to say with that? So it's then, spending time with the pictures that you make and then learning from them, and then letting them lead us to the next pictures we make. So I make work very much in a conscious way, where I've brainstormed and mind map, and I know I need this type of landscape with this type of person in it, and that I want the light to be at the half light or at dusk. So, I'm setting myself up for an image. I still expect there to be something that happens that I could never have imagined when I'm there shooting. But this idea of some pre-planning, going in, thinking about, the language, thinking about the formal concerns of what would be best to describe this scene. But then, so working in this way, and bringing that back to the studio, putting it up on the wall, but also same day going out with my camera and something stops me in my tracks when I'm driving to pick up my daughter from school, make that picture and see what it looks like next to the one that's more constructed. And so I've always worked in this way because I feel like if I only work in a constructed way, as in like planning these shoots and, sort of knowing the metaphors and symbols I'm trying to work with, my world gets smaller and the pictures get more restricted. Whereas if I only work in the I'm responding to the world kind of way, then the work feels less, not necessarily intentional, but it sort of has a place that feels like I don't quite understand it. So the two ways of working to me, A, means I work more, which is, a great thing. I'm making more pictures, which is a great thing. But it also gives me sort of access into parts that I didn't know before, So working the two together for me is the sweet spot. And I always try and encourage, people, my students to work that way too, because who knows what you only know what you know. So why not try working in a few different ways to see what sits right? Some people absolutely hate the pre-planning. It doesn't work for them. And that's great. One size doesn't fit all. But all I'm trying to do is just find a way to make more images. I do lots of yoga only as a way to clear out my head so I can make more images. That's how each day I think about, well, how can I make something today? How can I start off the day with some ideas and then end up somehow with a photograph or a piece of writing that touches on something I didn't understand today, or something that I want to appreciate, or something that I want to share with my community, my friends. So it's a way of just making more rather than making less. If you only make work when you go on holiday, then you're not going to be making enough work, So, and I'm really interested in this idea of the everyday and making a life through pictures. So those are the things that interest me.
It sounds to me that you are completely trustful of your process and that you're not as preoccupied with the outcome, which I think provides you a lot of freedom, because not everything you create is going to be successful. But if you trust the process, you know that in the end it will sort of work out. Tell me about your journey to get to that point where you trust the process and are not so bogged down by the outcome.
I mean, I love that. I've never thought of it quite so clearly, but I do. I 100% trust the process. And it has come out of living it. It's come out of 30 years of making and seeing that, it's not seeing that this process works and this process is truthful, like that what gets reflected in your pictures is always somehow a reflection of, the things that you're concerned with in the world. And that's concerned like tears, or it's concerned with joy. It's like things that you care about. It comes out in the photographs. I really do. And that's why, and I also, when I teach this way, I am not trained as a psychiatrist, or I have no idea, what's going on in people's lives. That's not my process. But I do trust that the camera always shines a light on someone's interiority. And I love that, right?
Yeah. Because I think that if you can buy into the fact that, first off, if you can find a process that works for you, not that people have to shoot like Cig or like Ivarian or anybody else, but if they can find that process that works for them, I think it allows you to sort of get out of your own way, especially if you have some degree of insecurity, not just with the respect of whether you wield a camera well, but whether or not you have anything to say. And I think that that's where a lot of people get stuck, is that, well, I don't know if I have anything interesting to say. And if you are obsessing on that, that sort of stagnates your ability to make the pictures in the first place, because you're constantly second guessing yourself and you sort of fall back on a lot of bad habits in terms of picture making, like when we started with, where you're just taking pictures of things. But that, you teach a lot. So you probably see that in a lot of students, especially people who are, younger, in terms of feeling, well, what I haven't led an interesting life, or my life is kind of boring. What could I possibly create that would have any resemblance of significance? So how do you, what's your response to that?
I think that everyone has something to say. I know everyone has something to say. I've worked with hundreds of people over the years, and I don't know anyone I've never met a student that didn't have anything to say, that something didn't come out in the course of the week or the day or the month or the year, 4-year, that their central themes didn't reveal itself through the photography if you work hard enough. I mean, the things you're talking about here is also, like insecurity, like, oh, I don't have anything to say. And, you just have to trust the process, and you have to get out with your camera to make something. I once had a student who was so blocked because she had spent her entire life giving to other people, giving to her children, giving to her husband, giving to her community, that she felt like she had nothing to say. And so she had a hard time writing, very blocked, couldn't, it was very hard to release. And so she ended up making this, but that ended up being the subject matter of what she had to say, of like claiming back time for herself and frustration. And it was an extraordinary project, because she ended up making these still lives where she threw like rotten fruit at the wall. And they were just these most beautiful still lifes of these stains on the wall. And it was about this life. And there is, and I think it comes back to this idea that we think that, or there's this sort of general notion that maybe art is something that's over there. I think of art as it's the business of being human, the difficult business of being human, with all our insecurities and failures and loves and hopes. And, everyone goes through that in life. Show me a single person that hasn't dealt with all of the human condition of what it is, and to be a human, to deal with emotions, to have feelings and all that comes with it, and that is the very definition and ingredients of art. I think there's just a thing in the culture where that it feels like art's over there. What's it about? We don't understand it, where, I think this sort of methodology of writing and looking at metaphors and symbols, that's just a way, that's the bridge to get there, right? And unfortunately, it's not taught that much in schools, so it seems like, oh, I don't understand it. I could do that when you walk into a museum of modern art. Well, of course you can do that. You're human too, right? And it's about realizing that all art is really, it's not that complicated. It's as complicated as what it is to be human, which is therefore also very complicated. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. There's a sort of a demarcation of your work when you're doing largely the self-portraits. It was more an exploration of your past, things that happened in your past, and you sort of re-examining them. And then later on, when you moved into Maine and you moved into the house, it was more about your present at the particular time, the things as they were playing out. And there are different ways of looking at time and your life and your experiences. But how did that shift in perspective, start changing or influencing how you made photographs, or probably more accurately, how you saw your photographs? Yeah.
So when I made those self-portraits that you're referring to, it was a period of about 5 years in the early noughts. So 2001, 2000, so 20, almost 20 years ago, to 2004. And I really haven't made many self-portraits since then. But it was a time period where I really sort of took on that idea of the constructed photograph. And I felt like I had to do it that way because I was making work about very specific past events. And so I would think about, well, what's the best light to use that? What would be the best shutter speed? What is is this story, should it be told in the shadows or should it be told at noon? Thinking about all these different ways that we can tell stories. And then, my central themes that I've learned through sort of just watching my work evolve over a number of years are, it's about feelings. They're about the senses, how it is to feel. And I'm really interested in photographing and writing about the times where we feel our most fragile, I think. That's one thing I've learned. Often, I think as artists, we're the last to see what's happening in our own work. And I think that's true even of me. Even though I love doing this exact thing, I'm still sort of flummoxed and dumbfounded by some of the work that comes, or the ideas behind the work that comes out of me. I think I've always been interested in that time of fragility, or where we as humans feel vulnerable. And so, my work was often about relationships in my late 20s, early 30s, and it's still about relationships. At the time, then, it was about more of a romantic relationships, who I was seeing. And then I met my husband, and I wanted to stop, then to be husband, and I wanted to stop making work about the past and concentrate on this beautiful present, where I also felt fragile and vulnerable in a wonderful way. And then I went on when we had moved to Maine and bought our house, and we had our daughter. I wanted to make work about what it was to be a mother and how terrifying but also extraordinary that felt. Again, vulnerability, right? So, and if you look through all of the trajectory of my work, I think of Emergency was about that sort of this idea of relationships. Gardening at Night became about buying a home, putting down roots, having a child. Orchestra Bomb, my third book, was about, or grew out of, being in a car accident where suddenly it felt the everyday was so precious and how life can change in an instant. So it felt really powerful to make work about the immediate. And then Blue Violet, which my latest book, grew out of, my best friend dying. These ideas of just just life and death and living and what it is to record a life through photography.
You mentioned your daughter, and I think that one of the things that can happen when you have a child, and unfortunately I never had children, but I've observed, my friends who have kids, and I've been thinking about my own childhood and the way that I remember certain things. And I have no doubt that my experience and my memories are very different from my brothers who, I grew up in the same household with. And there's certain things that are prominent in my head with respect to things that I remember about my upbringing. And so much about your work is about memory or about creating memories in the moment. But when you observe your daughter and you basically see her creating her own memories, her own experiences, when you observe her, has that given you any thought into how you remember things or how you interpret those moments as you sort of observe what's happening with your daughter?
First of all, I think all of photography really is about memory. I mean, I this is a sweeping generalization here, but I kind of think it's true that the act of making a photograph is an inherently a romantic notion. Now, I don't mean Hallmark romantic, but this idea of trying to preserve time, of trying to hold on to time in some way. Photography is so tied to time, like literally these tiny increments of shutter speeds, 125th of a second, 250th, 500, tiny elements, increments of time to somehow shine a light on this idea of big time, existential time. So, I think that photography is so wrapped up in this idea of memory. And with my daughter, I actually think it's less me trying to sort of capture memories for her. I think it's much more about, me. I know one thing that she does for me, I mean, amongst the many, is that I think what children do in general is that they remind us about how it is to feel. Right? They feel it all, the joy and the sadness and the immediate. And I think for me that's sort of an extraordinary way to sort of live, is to go about, feeling more. I truly believe that art can foster conversation, can unite us, that if you can make people feel through your images or through your any type of artwork, through your novel, through your food, if you make people feel more, they'll be more empathetic. I truly believe that. And so I think for me, what's having Scout and sort of watching her move through the world, it's a call to live. It's a call to roar with laughter, or it's a call to be sad when you're sad. It's to go out there. We just had our first snow recently, to like go out there and run in the snow. I mean, why not? It's this sort of these free, as in non-monetary experiences of like living and sort of seizing the day for me. And so while, yes, those might be sort of future memories, I also think it's very much about the now and how we want to live in this one short, precious life,
Books have always provided a wonderful oasis during difficult and hard times. Despite the many challenges we're all facing today, there is a joy to be had when you open a new book and discover something that inspires and brings happiness with each turn of the page. The books from the Charcoal Book Club are that for me, and I know it will also be for you, because each carefully curated book that arrives on your doorstep each month is from a photographer who shares our love for photography. Their passion, their dedication, and their artistry are evident on every page, and they provide a wonderful break from all that negative noise that's out there. The Charcoal Book Club publishes and distributes quality photo books at an affordable price. And as you build your collection of fine photography books, you can also support photographers who are deserving of your interest and your support. Become a Charcoal Book Club member today and enjoy a great new title each month. It's also a flexible service, so if you don't like that month's release, you can choose another of their titles of similar value. They offer free shipping to the US, Canada, and the UK. It's subsidized elsewhere. Join the club at charcoalbookclub.com today, and remember to use the code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. And if you believe in the work that we've done here for the past 16 seasons and you've never supported the show financially, today is a great time to change that. You can do that by contributing $5, $10, $20 or more a month by visiting patreon.com/TheCandidFrame. Just $5 a month from you can make a big difference. Thank you for your kindness and your support. Tell me about your writing, because your books, especially the latest one, Blue Violet, uses text as much as it does photographs. And there's a wonderful synchronicity that happens. I know that sometimes the text and the pictures are can sometimes be separated by significant periods of time. So it's like it's like pairing images, except you're pairing thoughts and ideas that you've put into words. Tell me about sort of developing that aspect of your creativity and merging it with what you're doing with your camera.
So I never set out with the idea that I would make books that would have text and image. And of equal weight, right? I mean, I'm sort of known for being more of a photographer, but, I do consider myself a writer, and that is a enormous part of my practice, just as much as taking pictures. I try and write every day. But what happened was, when I was putting together, and it came out of my teaching and my practice of just, okay, let's write. Let's get out what we're feeling inside right now. Let's spend 20 minutes timed right, where we just get out what we're feeling, and then we'll just be free to move about the world, go make pictures, go and interact with, the world around us. And then it felt like, occasionally when I was doing these 20-minute free writes, half an hour free writes, that I would really tap into something that felt important. So I would later come back a week later, a month later, the next day, depends, no time limit, and just take out that moment of, for example, when I saw the light shining on the mountain, and I would take out whatever it was, or my daughter saying this one thing, or something I'd overheard on the train. And I would come back to that one thing, and it felt like I had more to say around it. So then I would sort of do these extended writing periods of where I would just write about that moment and dig in deep, right, to sort of see what's behind that, why am I interested in this? And then that would become a sort of vignette, and then I would rewrite it, and it would become something that would end up in a book. And so often I think this idea that the written work, it has this sort of journalesque feel, but I want to sort of just note that it definitely is more labored than that, that it came out of an observation and then was sort of worked into a piece of writing. And initially, when I put together my first book, You Look at Me Like Emergency, was just images. And it felt like half of it was missing. It felt like that part of the story that the text needed to be in it to tell the full story. So the first book had some text, not loads in it. However, as the years have gone on, it's now sort of equal parts, I think, text and image. And for me, the text sort of gets at the same central themes, the same subject matter about sort of living in the moment and being aware and feeling the world. But it comes at it in a slightly different way. The text is more, in many ways, I've observed, more contemporary in some ways, making references to, I don't know, Amazon Prime or FedEx or things I would never take a picture of, but it feels so important that it for me to have the text and the image, that they sort of do quite different things in the hope to get to the more than the sum of their parts. But they are both coming from the same area, same place of, what is it that stopped me in my tracks today? What is it that made me gasp? What don't I understand? So taking these small moments and then somehow unpacking them further through writing about it.
You talked earlier about your process in terms of creating images. What's your process when it comes to your writing?
Quite similar and yet also different. As I think as you mentioned, I don't write to an image, or I've only done it once, I think. Write to an image and then, or vice versa, make photographs about a piece of text. I've only done that a couple of times. They normally happen quite independently. I typically love to write very early in the morning, like 4:35. I get up before the house is awake and I sit down almost while I'm asleep. Like I almost need to sort of get out of the way of my busy mind and tap into. So then I'll hit, look at my notebook, hit out my notebook and say, okay, well, yesterday I heard someone say this and it stayed with me. And so I'll then start writing about that. So it's this sort of, I might write for an hour at that point, and then I'll revisit it the next day, the next week, and it's a matter of rewriting it from there. So, the same with the pictures. It sort of all comes from this unconscious place, but then I put conscious thought around it, and I say, okay, well, let me think of some science, let me look up. I'm sort of quite interested in that idea of science and art colliding. So with Blue Violet, for example, a lot of the text came from these personal moments, but then were sort of interlaced with ideas of, the history of flowers or biology, or how flowers were used as botany, early medicine, And so I would sort of weave in these historical, these scientific facts into these personal experiences. And that to me felt so exciting.
If I wrote first thing in the morning, I would probably not be able to read what I wrote later, especially without a good cup of coffee inside of me.
Oh no, I've definitely got coffee. Sorry, I misspoke. The first thing I do is get a massive cup of coffee with cream. That was my own. When I moved to Maine, I learned the joys of a half and half or full cream in your coffee. Delicious. Just one really strong good cup. Oh yeah, sorry, nothing happens without a good cup of coffee. I only have one a day, but it's a really important one. And I might light a candle. I try and make it in a space where it feels sort of somehow beautiful and magical as a place to sort of start,
So you're writing longhand. So there's a physical process when you're putting pen or pencil to paper, and also when you do bookbinding. So you've designed your own books and you're working by hand. Tell me about the importance of that physicality of both of those processes, especially when you're putting them together. How important is that, the physicality of it, towards you finding the work again or rediscovering it in a different way?
I don't know how to sort of quantify it exactly, other than I know it's important. Other than it's, I definitely use the computer without a doubt. But the initial ideas have to come through longhand for me. I've had writing teachers who say that there's a direct link from the heart and the brain through the hand. I don't know if that's actually true, but I'm sure that there are people who write straight onto a laptop or straight onto a computer, and heart and head is still linked. So I would be hesitant to say it has to be longhand. Although for me, it has to be longhand initially. And then when I'm starting to sort of pull in facts and historical references and art history references, I'll definitely be on the computer at that point to pull it or weave it all together. But for me, somehow that real connection to the body and just the pen rather than a computer is really important. And maybe it's also because, you're not getting notifications about emails, or you're not using the computer you use for so much of sort of the right hand side of our brains as well, all the things we have to do today and responding to emails. And so there's something that's really sort of really beautiful and elegant about a pencil and a blank page. It's kind of weighty how empty it is, that I really respond to. And then when I come to sequence the books, it's a real creative process in itself. So I will have worked and done an initial sequence in Bridge or something like that, but it really all gets thrown out because the moment I sort of go into the studio, print everything out 8x10, plus the vignettes on a piece of paper 8x10, and then it's this puzzle. And I'm rubbish at doing puzzles. I'm useless at doing like 1,000-piece puzzles. It's not my strength at all. But I really think of putting together the books are like that too, because it has to. Not only is there typically with my books a sort of narrative arc, a start, middle, and end. There's also obviously sequencing visually, having the way. Sequencing through color, sequencing through palette, sequencing through, where your eye goes to in the frame, and all that joy. I love sequencing. And then, but also you've got the text now, like, oh, that can't go there. That's too early for this. And just, it becomes this impossible, or it feels like, and, working with students, I've often experienced their sort of frustration, like, oh, it's impossible to do it, and it's not, it's just, it takes time, and it's this slow-moving tanker ship where each day tiny things get moved around, and then you need a fresh pair of eyes to maybe come in and look at it. And so that in itself, for me, is a very physical process. It can't be done on a computer. It's just very different. But then I'm also someone who reads novels. I like the physical book, so I could just be a little archaic with this. How about you? Do you read on a Kindle?
Do both. I do both. There's certain books that I just like the physical book, especially if I know it's a book that I'm going to reread.
Yeah.
Because there's certain books I just go and I go, I know I'm going to pick this back up again. And so I'll just like sitting in the chair reading it. And there are other books, like a lot of nonfiction books that I know I'm probably not going to return to. So I just put those in my Kindle and I'll read through those. But a lot of my fiction and literature, I usually like a hard copy because I get an emotional attachment to those books. And so if I really
write all over mine.
Oh, do you? Well, that's how I got through college.
All over it.
Yeah. I discovered that I have ADHD a couple of years ago. And as I was reading about it, I realized that because I had gone through most of my life being undiagnosed, and I realized that when it came to being able to read something, if someone immediately asked me a question about what I was reading, I would not be able to verbalize it, right? And one of the things I did was I would write notes in the margins. And when it came time to write a paper, it was the notes in the margins that allowed me to be able to digest what I'd written and to be able to translate it into the essays I was writing for my English classes. And so it was really kind of
exactly what I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think if someone asked me immediately, well, what about it you read? I just go blank. And people think, oh, I'm just having this book around as for decoration.
Yeah, I mean, I do exactly the same thing. I mean, no one, like, I can't borrow books from a library, even though I love libraries. I take my daughter there all the time. I can't help it. I can't stop writing in margins, or, and that's exactly how any book that I'm reading, whether it's novel or nonfiction, typically I'm reading things that are somehow linked to my photo work, or written work somehow. And so I can't I have to write, and then I'll go back through, and a book when I'm finished looks like it's 120 years old. It's dog-eared. Like, I have this whole, like, when something's really important, it's a thought I want to come back to, I'll turn the page up from the bottom left triangle. If it's just where I'm going to sleep, it's top. I have this like whole system to make notes. And you can't lend me a book because it will come back looking. And then I really love that copy. That copy has to, like, it stays with me and it's marked up. And I mean, it can't be another copy of it, has to be that one.
As you mentioned, you're very prolific. You're always creating work. But when did you make the decision that, okay, it's time to sit down and produce this latest book, in terms of, making the decision and beginning the process of looking back at what you've created and deciding, okay, which of all these images that I've created over whatever period of time it was are meant to be together.
That's really, it's a complicated response. And I sort of work with, and I think, many of us who are making photographs and like, when is the project over? When is it starting? Am I doing it now? And when is it over? And I think if you're paying attention to the work, it tells you. I mean, in many ways, you could put all 4 of my books together in one and it would just be one very big book, so there's a certain logistical part when it's about a life that's being lived, in a sense, a simple, non-extraordinary life being lived, then it all sort of leads into one. But I do feel that, typically that you're concerned about, within your central themes, there's sort of area you're concerned with, like, fully. And it, for me, and from the students that I've worked with, typically 2-3 years, and then you sort of move on to a different area. So it's being aware. Typically, there's normally a book in each of the a photograph in each of the books that I've done that should have belonged in the next book, or should have, it's not quite actually in the right book, but no one would know other than me. Or maybe people think, well, that one doesn't really fit, but that's okay. I mean, I love books that are around one idea. It's the same with albums, music albums. Like, I typically don't like greatest hits. Who does? It's I think about the new Adele album, right? It's her breakup album or something. I mean, there's something about that. Taking sort of, in 2 years' time, she'll have moved on. She'll still, I'm sure that will still hurt that time period, but it will be, newer human experiences will have taken over, be more immediate, perhaps. Obviously, I'm not meaning to speak for her, but that same idea of, I found that, for example, with me in the car accident, I made that book. It was really only a 2-year body of work, which is quite, not much for me. I would say typically most of my books are around 4 years of work, but 2 years and then it had sort of lessened. The impact of it had lessened, whereas that first year, there wasn't a single day I didn't think about that accident probably 20 times a day. And it comes down to being human, right? And time. We say, when you're like devastated, that you just have to like pick yourself up, put your clothes on, go out and do that day. And in time, you will feel better. Right. And I think that, that element of time, you want to make the work, your project, in that time period, for me, where I'm feeling it the most. But that might not be for everyone. People might, again, it was, when I started making Emergency, I was looking back on the past and remembering how I felt then. I'm working in different ways now, but I do think that there's a time period where there's a natural time period to most things. Do you agree?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Cause I never know when anything started. I just started making the pictures. Yesterday, I started just I had gathered a bunch of pictures that I've made over the last sort of 20 years and just put them all together. And I just started this process of just pairing. There was a photographer I listened to, I forget her name recently, and she had just done this thing about pairing her pictures, and that just sort of spurred me to do that. And I brought these 2 pictures together that I think there was a 7-year or 10-year gap between the 2 of them. And they just sang together. And one was a picture of a pair of tennis shoes that a guy was wearing and they kind of splayed out. And the other one was in a barber shop and the tissue was underneath the collar of the person and it was splayed out in very much the same way as the shoes. And I looked at that and I was just like, oh my God, I never would have thought of bringing those together. So over the next month, I'm just going to grab pictures and just see how they play off of each other, just as a way of sort of rediscovering them. And I think and whether that turns into anything, I don't know, but it was an interesting way of sort of revisiting and how
I love that,
how the difference in time is absolutely meaningless in terms of the relationship and the meaning derived from the images when they're brought together.
I mean, I agree with that too. I mean, I definitely think, in a way, so, I just said, I think that the time is really important, but then I'm also saying in another breath, is it though? I mean, couldn't this just be one big book? And I mean, what you described like this, a formal concern, right? So the tennis shoes look like the tissue. So there was this visual reference that was so beautiful together. And I would challenge you even further to say, well, is there some content, so not just, formal concerns of how things look, but are they content related? Because I do believe that each one of us that's a photographer really only has one or two central themes, and we have to spend our entire lives trying not to repeat ourselves. So it could be that I'd actually love to see the images of it. I mean, it's my most favorite thing to do is to look at people's images, put them together and start seeing, well, how is that portfolio or that picture of the tennis shoes actually connected content-wise with that tissue or the different portfolios. There's always a connection, but sometimes it feels like disparate. Like we don't spend enough time thinking about how our different portfolios are actually very much linked with the same ideas. I mean, what do you think of for your central themes?
God, that is something I have been thinking a lot about, and I'm not sure. I've been doing a lot of writing. And for me, I know part of it is about memory, trauma plays a part in that. But one of the things that I've always been aware of is that there are certain things that I am sensitive to that lead me to make a photograph. And though largely it may be sort of graphic in nature, at least that's the way it takes form in the photograph. Whatever is sort of the impulse that drives me to make that discovery is innately something about me that is very different from anybody else. Because I could be among 3 other photographers and they're not going to react to this very same thing at all. And if they do, they're going to interpret it in a completely sort of different way. And sort of understanding what it is that that indescribable part of me is being led to. I've never been able to give voice and give it a hard definition, but I know what it feels like. When I have that moment, it's like I am, just as you are 100% sure of your process, I am 100% confident of that moment because I have felt it so many times that I have my complete trust in it. And the challenge for me is, well, can I successfully interpret it into a photograph? Can I figure out enough of this scene or this moment that's presenting itself and contextualize it within the frame? Why that initial spark happens at all, I don't know. But I know that I can trust it.
I've always said that photography somehow, I don't know why, but it's the truth say, it's the fortune, it's the Ouija board that somehow I don't know why it works, but it does. I trust it, that it's something that our conscious mind is just bumbling along behind us when the instinct comes, when that moment.
Oh yeah. Cause I'll vocalize it. Oh, I am just on every synapse in me is firing simultaneously in that moment. And I think for me, that's the most intoxicating, seductive thing about photography for me. It's not so much making the picture, it's making the discovery. That for me is the most seductive part of it, because part of me feels like I found a secret treasure that no one else is aware of.
Yeah, and that's why it never gets old. Well, you can be in this a lifetime, and that feeling is still so magical and so precious and so elusive, but also so recognizable when it happens. And I'm just so grateful that to pick a life in photography that we have this. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
The Curious Society is about providing a solution for the changing economic world of photojournalism and documentary photography. They are a group of people that see the challenges faced by photographers, and they're doing something about it by building community and supporting visual storytelling. That's what I love about the Curious Society, a member-supported nonprofit that has created an organization devoted to the work of today's best photojournalists and documentary photographers. If you have a passion for visual storytelling, you can start being a part of this community by becoming a member and joining in on their weekly hangouts on the Clubhouse app every Tuesday. Find out more by visiting their website at curioussociety.org. I'm sure you've had your moments where you've had your dry spells or you struggled as much as you have come to understand what your process is and what works for you, where it seems like everything is just screeched to a halt or it's just become insurmountable. So how do you move through those times?
Well, the writing really helps. I mean, it really does. It's a way to access, because when you're like in the screeching halt, like at the time, typically the answer is get out there and make pictures. You just don't want to do it, right? So either writing kind of like, it starts to like get something out of you, and then, all right, maybe it's not so bad. And you like, so for me, the writing definitely helps. I have other tricks. There's this great little book called Art and Fear.
Oh, yeah. Great book. I've reread it numerous times.
Great book. Me too. So that's something, because oftentimes the reason why we are not making our work is because we feel like we have nothing to say, or we feel like, we've said it before that it's no good, or it's this, self-doubt comes in. And so I think that book is a really wonderful reminder of we all feel like that, and that's part and parcel of it. So I love, I'll go and sit, and in the bath and read that, or I'll go in for a walk and listen and something like that. So that's something I'll do. I'll also give myself a little, I'll say, okay, you're allowed to go to Goodwill and you can buy one prop at Goodwill. Can't spend much money. You have to be willing to ruin it, burn it, bury it, throw it. And so that helps me access, just having some fun again, with it. So I have different tricks that when I'm feeling like, I've got nothing to say, different things I'll do to start feeling creative again. But I do know that the answer is get out there and make pictures. And so it's then a matter of trying to like con myself or like trick myself to get out there and actually follow through and do that. And then other times it's like you're just on fire and I can't sleep at night because I can't wait to make pictures and I'm feverish, and it becomes, I'm in my project. I know exactly what I've got to do. And one thing I've learned is, it's never like that. It's always feverish or like, nothing to say, feverish, like love it. This sucks, and it's like this, that is the journey of creativity. So the one good thing I know is that when you're feeling the highs and the lows and the highs and the lows, you're on the right path. Art is not a straight, flat road, it is just not. So there's one thing I know, that when I'm not feeling it, like, okay, this is also how I should be feeling some of the time. So what can I do to pick myself up? Who can I call? Who can like jolt me out of this? What can I read? What can I go and see? How can I trick myself, jolt myself to feel creative again? And just realizing that not making the work is always going to be more painful in the long term than ever making it. You never regret going out with your camera, or at least I haven't. I've never gone, oh shit, why did I get up this morning? That was a waste. It always leads to something. Photography is nothing but good. I mean, it just brings so much more to your life, whether you get access to all these people that you had never met before because the camera gave you license, or like opened the door for you to go in and meet someone, literally or figuratively. It just is always a medium that that opens and extends your life rather than making it smaller.
I find that during those moments, I've had to also make it okay and not beat myself up for it, and just say, okay, yeah. I'm in this spot right now. It's fine. And even if I'm making photographs and I just feel like they're derivative of what I've already created, going, that's okay. I just need to keep making it, because at some point things will change. But just not getting bogged down in the struggle and wishing that there wasn't any struggle, because there's a reason for it, but I may not be able to recognize it in the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. And also I think it helps to, get off the computer, to make physical prints, to, to start, seeing the work itself grow and be alive and change. I think there's lots of little tricks that I do that, definitely help jolt you out of it. I mean, a field cannot be flowering all year round. It can't be, So, but is there something else you can do during that time period? Like if I'm feeling a little schlumpy, I tend to say, okay, well, you're going to do your taxes and your bookkeeping today. And then I'm like, I don't do that either. I'll stop. Because that business side of photography has to happen too. So if I'm feeling schlumpy, I'll be like, all right, I'm just going to do the stuff that is not most creative right now. And then that's done for when I'm feeling feverish and can't sleep because I need to go and make something at 4 a.m., So it's, again, it's like picking projects that we don't have to go to, that we're just part of our lives, like let's not make it so hard or like impossible for ourselves to set ourselves up to fail again, Let's be kind to ourselves. I always say to, my students, this idea of talk to yourself like you would your kid. You would never, the harsh talk that you can interiorize, you would never do that to your kid. At least I would hope you would never do that. So, the artist within you is this sort of joyful, creative being. Like it doesn't need the chastising by the other side of you. That muscle does not need to be exercised any more than it's already doing,
Very true. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Okay. So can I have two or just one?
Go ahead. Two is okay.
Okay. Debbie Fleming Caffrey. Do you know Debbie Fleming Caffrey's work? Mm-hmm. She's great. She's a Southern photographer. She is, she's extraordinary, prolific, has, made this extraordinary life of making pictures. Her work is, it is all the feelings. She's a sort of documentary, street documentary photographer, and just packed full of emotion and energy and, has worked all her life. Just extraordinary work, black and white work. I just absolutely love her work. She is, and also she's an amazing person. And then a younger friend of mine, Madeleine Morlaix, she has an extraordinary body of work that she's building. Just really energetic, alive work, and someone who sort of walks the walk and is going through all the inquiry and what it is to sort of make this big body of work. So those are my two suggestions for people to check out.
All right. Well, Cig, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Me too. I'm so glad to have finally connected with you, and I'm deeply honored to be on the show. So I thank you. And I'm sorry the email notification was binging. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I didn't hear it. Thanks to Cig for joining us. Explore her work by visiting cigharvey.com. And if you purchase her book, Blue Violet, use our affiliate link, which you'll find in the show notes or our website. And remember to check out the Curious Society at curioussociety.org. They're building a wonderful community, promoting and supporting exceptional photojournalism and documentary photography. Buy the first issue of the magazine or become a member. And remember, check out their weekly discussion on Tuesday afternoons on the Clubhouse app. If you're a fan of the work that we do, there are different ways for you to support us. You can write a review on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts, share a favorite episode on your social network, be it Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and you can also support us financially by contributing via PayPal or Patreon. Thanks to Remo Fioroni, Charles Origer, and Daniel Chalmers for their recent contributions. And if you can't find every episode of the show on whatever service you listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, available for both Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at Incompetech.com. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.